should just let us know.
That's it, recording.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along this evening. We really appreciate you coming to it, and I know that it's a Wednesday night and you all have lots of very busy things to do, and we know that it's coming close to the holidays, the end of term, and no doubt you are all tired as well. So we really appreciate you coming along tonight. We are joined by Janine McCulloch from Education Scotland, who's going to talk to us about the promise. I'm Kat Calvert. I'm the Work Lead Officer for Wellbeing for Learning in the West Partnership, and I'll tell you a wee bit more about myself towards the end of the session. Janine, over to you.
Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for having me along. And this is very much going to be a follow-on from last week's session, where we were looking at the common themes across children's rights, the Morgan Review and the promise. So today we're going to dig a little bit deeper into how you can keep the promise within your classroom. So let me see if I can get my mouse onto the screen. So today we're going to do a very quick recap of rights, reviews and promises and the 4 common themes. I won't spend much time, and I'm hoping most of you attended last week, and if you didn't, I highly recommend you have a look back at the video and the slides that will be available for you. Just to put it in context, so you're seeing all of the different themes and then seeing how the promise and keeping the promise fits into that. I'm also going to recap a little bit about the overview of the promise and the promise plan and the key messages for education in general, and then bring it down to the implications for you as a practitioner within the classroom. So all the way through, I want you to be thinking about your current practice, and as ideas come up, what would you potentially want to change immediately or in the longer term to try and help keep the promise for care experienced youngsters within your classroom. So that's just a little task for you to do as we go through this presentation. So this is a very a quick reminder about the rights, reviews and the promise. And the reason we do that is we know that overarching over everything is children's rights. Okay, if we can realise children's rights, we will be supporting youngsters who have care experience. We will be supporting our youngsters who require any shape or form of additional support needs. So when we looked at all the new legislation, recommendations that came out in 2020, we knew that we had to simplify this for the system. And when we looked at it, we came up with these 4 common themes that if we know we work in and around these themes, we will be realising children's rights, we will be meeting their needs, and we will be supporting and keeping the promise, supporting our care experienced youngsters. And they are rights and participation, relationships, wellbeing and care, and inclusion and universal support. And they really can't be separated. They are interdependent and interconnected. So we always have to think of all of them together. Okay. So last week, I ran through what each of those sections might mean in the classroom. I'm not going to repeat it, so I've put it onto one slide, and I've basically put it onto one side to say that the common themes could easily be broken down to your own personal practice, how you present yourself to the children within your classroom. And does that look like it is rights respecting? Does it proactively build relationships? Does it prioritise well-being, and are you being inclusive? So that's about you yourself. The second one is about your classroom environment, what you create that the youngsters sit in, whatever that looks like. So does it feel safe? Is it a place where all learners feel that they're welcome and that they're cared for? And the next one is about actually what you teach and how you teach it. So regardless of whether you're primary or secondary, and whatever you teach, you're teaching children. So embedded in that, we would hope that they're learning about rights, relationships and well-being, even if it's maths. I'm a secondary maths teacher, and I always used to say maths is a subject where everybody counts. Okay, and the last one is about how your learners feel within your classroom and you actually being concerned about that. So it's about, do your learners feel that they're listened to and that they're able to participate in all aspects of learning? So that's what and how they learn, but also decisions around things like classroom expectations, okay, boundaries, and being a proactive part of, say, for example, problem solving if there's issues within the classroom. And a big part of that is, are their needs being met? Okay, regardless of what those needs are. So that was a very quick rundown of what we did last day. Of course, there was a lot more detail last day, but I didn't want to go past it and go straight on to the promise. Now, this is just a quick reminder. The promise didn't come out of nowhere. It came out after a 4-year independent care review where they actually took into consideration 5,500 lived experiences of young people who have lived through care, of the people who cared for them, and the people who worked with them. It was really extensive, and they came up with 80 calls to action for us, the people who work with young people. But of course, that's much wider than education. So the promise was broken down into 7 different reports. It was a wee bit indigestible for the average person. So we've had to break it down into something much simpler. And over the course of the last couple of years, I've broken it down to something really simple for educationalists. And it's not because we're stupid, but it's because we need to see where our place is in this. So these points that I have up on the screen here, it's just a wee reminder for us of what the promise is saying. It reminds us that education is actually part of the scaffolding of care. We can't have children in our schools or our educational settings for 26 to 28 hours a week and not be part of the scaffolding of care. And most of us, I would say, in education went in because we care about youngsters. So it is part of the scaffolding of care. The difference between us and, say, for example, social work and health and social care is that we are very much a universal service. So we have lots of youngsters in our educational settings. We have lots of youngsters in our classroom, and we try and meet all of their needs collectively together. Of course, we target individual needs at times, but overall, we're a universal service. The promise actually reminded us that a universal service like ourselves in education, it tends to be inclusive and it tends to be non-stigmatizing because everybody gets it. So you haven't been singled out. So education is a really good place for young people who experience care to feel normal. The promise reminded us that we have to see children holistically. Now, I have put a wee side to this, and we have to see them in the context of their family, and that's particularly important when we're thinking of care experienced youngsters, because that family context could be quite complicated, and it could be quite complicated throughout their whole lives. So it's not going to be necessarily the same. Remembering, if we think about youngsters who jump into different types of care, okay, they may be looked after at home with the support of social work, then maybe looked after by granny, and then they maybe go into a residential unit, then maybe go back to look at being looked after by mum at home with the support of social work. So the situation changes and it can be quite complicated. We have to have a bit of an overview of that to really understand the context that the youngster's living in if we're really going to meet their needs. So I've put a wee aside to that about thinking about the My World Triangle and the whole thing about GIRFIC and getting it right for every child, and thinking of the youngster in terms of their physical environment and how they are. So are they tired? Are they hungry? Are they cold? You know, do they have a jacket, etc.? Their social self. Have they developed social skills? Are they socially underconfident or incompetent because they haven't had enough opportunity to practice? Educationally, we have to think about them, and finally, we have to think about them psychologically as well, because many of our youngsters, because of the context of their lives and their family circumstances, they've actually experienced trauma. They maybe have attachment issues, and we're going to talk about that today in a really generalized and brief sense, but it's something that you have to bear in mind, particularly for care experienced young people. And also, we have to think about them in the context of the family. So many care experienced youngsters, their family could be much more extensive than what we would traditionally think. I tend to think of my mum and my dad and my brother when I think of my family, but if they've been in several foster homes, they might have a much more extended, if they sofa surf between granny and auntie and big sister or big brother, how their view of their family could be quite different. And also many of our cared for young people are actually carers, because until the point where they came under care experience, and even sometimes beyond that, they have cared for the younger brothers and sisters because mummy or daddy couldn't. And they've also potentially have been caring for mummy and daddy, or one or both, because of the health issues or capacity issues. So they could also have been young carers. So, and the final thing that I've got in that list is everybody who works with young people who have care experience. We want to sort of approach those families with the same sort of values, the same sort of language, and the same sort of skill set. So it's really worth our while doing similar training like this with social workers, health and social care workers, youth workers, community workers, so that we're not confusing families by using different language, having different value systems. So that's just something to put this into context. I'm only giving you a very brief overview of this because a lot of this is the plan that came out of the promise. And the plan is a 10-year plan split up into 3 small sections. So this is the plan for 2021 to 2024. And they have split it up into 5 key priority areas. But what I want you to look at is just to have an overview of what those priority areas are. But at the top in the different colours, I've actually put up what the core principles behind this are. And they're things like to remind us that even if our young people and their families there's care experience, and that's what we're talking about today, they may live in poverty. Okay, we have to try and realise their rights, which is much more difficult for a youngster who's care experienced for all sorts of reasons. We need to listen to them. They are the experts in their own lives and their own families. We need to consider what matters to children and families, and sometimes it's different for care experienced families because of the circumstances that they're living in. So very often a parent in a care experienced family is just really happy if their child's attending school. So they're not truanting, they're actually got a placement and they feel welcomed there and they're sustaining it, rather than a big focus on attainment and achievement. Obviously we want to focus on that, but when we report to the families, we have to keep the focus on they're enjoying school, they seem happy. You know, so what matters to children and families we need to talk about. And the last thing that I will be bringing out today for you is about language, the language we use around care experience and with care experienced young people. So in that, you'll also see I've got 2 circles. The main place that your support will be is under that section of the good childhood. Okay, that's what we want for our youngsters. And the support that you provide, that's mainly referring to mental health and wellbeing support. That right to an education, that they're definitely getting it. They're in class and they're learning. And about us being relationship based, okay, because that's how we engage youngsters. But I've also circled one section there in green because you need to feel supported to be able to do this. And sometimes, I'm going to use the horrible word which you don't like, but sometimes care experienced youngsters have a lot of social and emotional needs that are beyond, and maybe even behavioural needs that are beyond the rest of the class because of the circumstances they find themselves into, and can present us with challenge. I know it's coming from a distressed place, but it can be challenging to us. So we sometimes need a bit of support to be trauma informed and trauma sensitive, to be able to show really good relationship based practice. Okay, so we can't ignore ourselves in this scenario. So that's why I've circled that in green. Okay, so this is really the end of the generic bit because I want to take it back to the classroom. Now I can't avoid doing this. I'm always going to bring it back to the 4 themes. If we focus on those 4 themes, we'll be getting it right for children, even our care experienced youngsters. But I just wanted to set the 4 themes in the context of some of the priorities and some of the core principles that have come out of the promise, and you can sort of see where they fit. there, I've removed a lot of the noise and just took it down to the things that you can be doing within your classroom. So in other words, things like listening to our youngsters, making sure our care experienced youngsters also have a voice. They don't sit back and disengage, thinking about what matters to children and families, thinking about the intersectionality of their need. So they may have care experience, they may live in poverty, they may also have additional support needs in terms of learning. And the language that we use, that it's not stigmatizing. And you might think we wouldn't use that. And I can tell you, I have. And I've been working with these youngsters for 25, 30 years, and I have used it, and I'm consciously making an effort to change. Okay, and in the centre there, I think this all revolves around relationships, but we all want children to have a good childhood, regardless of what their family circumstances are. So what does keeping the promise mean to you in the classroom? I'm going to do this in two parts. Okay, one part I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on, and the second part I think we'll have covered in a lot of last week's work. So the first part really is about you being emotionally available for your youngsters. These will be exactly the youngsters where their family circumstances may be chaotic, may be very unsettled. They might not be sure where they're going home to sleep that particular night. So you need to be emotionally available for your youngsters. And you proactively need to develop nurturing and mentoring relationships, because that may be something that's missing in the lives of care experienced children and young people, the capacity potentially of their parent or the person who's caring for them, because it could be a granny. It could be a brother or sister who's not much older than them, so their capacity to do that mentoring may not be there, and you might be the person that's there for them. Now you'll see at the side I've put codes. Well, most of you will have probably clocked that's referring to the nurture principles. So all of these, and I know a lot of you will have had training around nurture, and it completely articulates with really good practice around working with children with care experience and keeping the promise. It's not rocket science, but I'm going to make sure that there's explicit links here today. So the second thing is about listening to our young people, but also they may not know how to articulate what would help them, how they feel. They may not have the language of that. So we also are seeking to understand what they're saying to us through their actions. So again, referring to the nurture principles. So all behaviours communication. I often use the example, a youngster who comes in with their hood up and they're hiding in their hood. It's a clear indication that they're not very comfortable, that they're maybe trying to escape, withdrawn from the social setting. So what's their behaviour telling us, and us trying to understand that? The third thing is about using really simple and caring language, not overly professionalised language that they can understand. And actually it clearly promotes to them that you do care about them. And we're going to go on and talk a wee bit more about that. Being trauma sensitive and trauma informed. Okay, we don't need a PhD or a mental health degree to be able to be trauma sensitive. Okay, and hopefully I'm going to reassure you of that today, and that your classrooms can be trauma sensitive and proactively supporting transitions. Now, when people think that, they always think P7 to S1 or going from school to whatever happens after school, so your post-school destination. But I'm going to suggest you see, for a youngster who's experienced a lot of change in their life in terms of the people that are in their life or where they even live, so where they sleep from one night to the next, those micro transitions of people, place and activity can be massively stressful. So for a care experienced youngster, just that little bit of stress of a new teacher in the classroom, of changing the activity or the seating plan in the classroom, or you know, a change of place. So moving them from the classroom to the assembly hall for the Christmas play can be just too much for them. So how do we proactively support that, okay, to be trauma-free? So I'm going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail, and I'm going to definitely not overlap with last week as much as possible. So it's something a bit new. What I've got up here is last week we talked about relationships and maybe what your practice would show. Some of you will have had all sorts of training. You'll have training in nurture principles, you'll have had training on inclusive practice, you'll have had training around responsibility of all and the wellbeing indicators and what you're looking out for and trying to develop within your youngsters, maybe restorative approaches, etc. All of these are relationship-based practice. None of them are better than the rest, and in actual fact, I would suggest at different times we use all of them, okay? You don't have to be fantastically well trained in them to be able to use solution-oriented language, say for example, or to have restorative values, thinking and language within your classroom, okay? So if any of these you're thinking, oh, I'm not too sure what that is, it's worth your while finding out a little bit more about them, because all of these approaches will support your care experienced youngsters. And remember, anything that supports your care experienced youngsters will also support all your other youngsters. So please, 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 if you're not sure, find out a little bit more, okay? The only other thing that I didn't mention last is I didn't make it as blunt as this, but relational practice really looks at well-being. It prioritizes well-being, because if a child's not well, they can't learn. So even if they're emotionally unsettled, they can't learn. So this statement, and a lot of you will have heard it before, you can't do Bloom until you've done the Maslow stuff. So unless a child feels psychologically safe, they're physically safe as well, they feel loved and they feel like they belong, they've got enough sense of self-esteem that they put themselves out there to experience learning. Because remember, a lot of them will stand back because of that fear of failure of learning. They'll not be able to move on to the learning stage. So you could have the most all singing and all dancing lesson, but the child comes in not feeling psychologically safe and can't engage in that wonderful lesson that you've prepared. So we have to prioritize that first. And it is a real juggle to be able to do that and quickly move on to the learning, because that's what they're there for. But to be able to do that around potentially the whole class, but also with an individual. And I've popped up there in the corner the fact that if you can constantly be thinking about that, thinking about the youngsters coming into your class, whether you've got a primary class and they're with you most of the day, or whether you've got them for 50 minutes in a secondary school, proactively thinking about that class beforehand, and how do you try and meet the Shinari indicators, thinking about, we've got a lot of youngsters in this class who aren't achieving, or we've got a lot of youngsters in this class, that they're not responsible. So how do I prioritize a little bit of that in my lessons? If you're doing that, you will also be realizing their rights, okay? Because that little circle, those little dots with the numbers in them, are the articles from the UNCRC and how they fit into the wellbeing indicators. So I hope that makes sense. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you into some of those points that I started at the beginning to say, what does keeping the promise mean for me as a practitioner? And I started off with saying being emotionally available and developing those nurturing relationships, and also seeking to understand, listening to youngsters and seeking to understand their behaviour, or what they're communicating to us through their behaviour. So I could not resist but go back to the nurture principles, and I know a lot of you will be so steeped in this and will know and use the nurture principles every day and will know what they mean in terms of different individual children, but I didn't want to make the assumption. So you will start to see how these are really, really relevant for youngsters with care experience. So if learning is understood developmentally, you will know, and I'm thinking particularly of our secondary practitioners, if there's any here today. You will have youngsters who are coming in S1 who are actually presenting in terms of social skills developmentally as if they're in a sort of 7 or 8. They're not 11 or 12. They're presenting as their social development has been arrested. Now, a lot of that is because of developmental trauma they've experienced because their care experienced. Now, I don't want to say necessarily neglected, but the parent has not necessarily been able to care for them well because of health reasons and all sorts of reasons. But whatever the reasons are, we've ended up with a child who their social development has been arrested, and potentially their ability to learn has been arrested as well. So you can start to see where that nurture principle is particularly significant for a youngster. So we have to meet them where they are developmentally, not where we expect them to be. Classroom being a safe base, this is where you provide that psychological safety, and the classroom could be the only place that they feel psychologically safe, because most of us think we're safe when we're at home, but they may not. They may not. Nurture is important for well-being and self-esteem, and we've talked about how well-being is essential for learning. Language is a vital means of communication, and I've mentioned this before. Many of our youngsters, we ask them, what did you feel? We're trying to do the right thing, and we'll say to them things like, what were you feeling when that happened or whatever? But they don't have a language of feelings to start off with. So we might need to go back to basics and take them through a language of feelings and explain to them around emotions and how they would recognize in other people and how they understand their own. So this could be something that we're having to do with youngsters, even though we might not teach in a primary setting, but if we want to move forward with youngsters and we know that we're constantly seeing certain behaviours or emotions are coming to the surface all of the time, we need to proactively be working around that. All behaviours, communication, which I've mentioned, and the importance of transitions, because transitions could be really stressful for them. So on the other side, what does that mean for you in the classroom? Well, proactively planning for support and wellbeing at a universal level for the whole class. Now, whether that means offering a starter activity, so everybody has a 5-minute settling in when they get into the class, that will benefit all your children, but it would particularly benefit your youngsters who got really anxious walking through that corridor coming to you, or even coming from home to school, that transition, or you're the last period of the day, or it's the end of the day in a primary classroom and they know they're going home and they don't know where they're going home to. So you can be providing well-being at a universal level for your class, or you can be providing it specifically for a youngster in the class. And if you're thinking about that, offering a safe base, you could be the safe base. So simply proximity to the youngster could be all they need to feel held by you, held in mind by you for that youngster, and that helping them have that psychological safety. Recognizing that relationships are really central to learning and well-being, so you're proactively developing those, and recognizing the impact of attachment and early experiences on development. And that's what I would like to go on to next. So I don't want to explain attachment to you, because I've been told by practitioners we've done the theory. We know about insecurely attached and securely attached and Bowlby. What do we do about it? So that's what I was going to suggest we just talk about now. So attachment in the classroom. These are things that help. So if you know a youngster, you suspect they're insecurely attached to any adults, okay, they haven't had reliable attachment relationships with the other adults that they've experienced in their lives before, these are things that can help for you to become that trusted, reliable adult in their lives and to create that secure attachment in the classroom. The top section is about what you would do in the immediacy of helping the youngster, and the bottom section is what you would do longer term to help them. So things like being empathetic, trying to put yourself in their shoes, okay, and being nurturing, trying to be attuned to their emotions and then responding appropriately. And if you don't know enough about attunement, that's something else to go and do some professional learning about, because it really is worthwhile trying to look out to see that, understanding what that behavior is telling you and trying to read the emotions of a youngster so that you can accurately respond to it. Because many youngsters will present all the time as angry, but in actual fact, that's not how they're feeling. They might be frustrated, they might be sad, they might be lonely, but it presents as anger. So it's really worth your while doing some additional reading or professional learning around attunement if you're not totally familiar with that language. Being consistent and predictable, and I don't mean consistent in response. Some people actually think that means I have a lovely set of rules here, and when you break them, these are the sanctions that you're going to receive. So that's consistency. But that's not child-centered, because all your children have different needs. So if you give one response every time something happens, you're not meeting the needs of an individual child. Okay, so one child might come in and get their mobile phone out, and in actual fact, they're just trying to pick up the message that somebody's just sent them about a funny. But another child is there because they're worried, they don't know where they're going home that night. It could be to grannies or aunties, or they're worried about mum or dad, or they're worried about a brother or sister. So you don't know the context. If you use the same response, you're not going to necessarily be empathetic, and you're not going to necessarily meet the needs. And when the next time you try to get learning out of that youngster, the likelihood is you're not going to get it, because they'll have known you haven't understood them. Okay, so it's consistency of approach, and the approach is about relationships. I want you in my class. I really like you. I don't particularly like behavior that you're showing me, but I like you and I want you in my class. So what do we need to do to keep you in my class? Okay, and that you're always like that. So one day you're not their pal, and the next day you're throwing the rule book at them. So they want you to be predictable, so you can be that reliable person in their lives, and you're not going to abandon them either by saying, as soon as they say something to you that they don't like, or do something that you don't like, you're going to put them out of the class. And regular check-ins, just to see how they are. If you know a youngster is emotionally vulnerable, if you know that they don't have many people in their lives that they can rely on, be the person that goes over, how are you today? Okay, you all right? Something as simple as that, a wee check-in that you've noticed them. You want them in your classroom, okay? So really simple stuff. The next section is about, if you know they are struggling, long term, what do you do to actually give them those social skills, social competency, social confidence, that they can go forward, that they can trust other adults? So it's about modeling what a healthy social relationships are like, and remembering that's not just with the young people, that's with your colleagues. Okay, and when you're talking about your own family as well. So all the modeling that goes with that, helping them recognize poor behavior, because remembering how they're behaving in your class might be how they're behaving at home, and that might be totally acceptable at home. So trying to recognize in this context, that's not, that's not good, and it's because it's disrupting other youngsters and they can't learn. And what's more, once they're disrupted, you're not learning either. So, trying to understand that what is poor behavior and what's not, without being judgmental, etc. Helping them understand that they are responsible for what they do. Okay, and I'm going to mention this later. It's not about being permissive and saying, oh, you're a poor wee soul, that's all right, you can do that. No, we have to prepare them for life ahead, and so being permissive is not there, but understanding what's poor behavior and that they were responsible for it, so they might have to do some repair work afterwards. Teaching them how to positively interact. How many of your youngsters you'll recognise they're shouting at, pushing and bullying, the bully boy stuff, because they're trying to make friends, not realising that that's not how you do it. Okay, you could be intimidating another child. So actually teaching them those pro-social skills and what they look like, providing opportunities for them to practice them in really safe wee environments. You don't put them beyond what they're able to do, but lots of wee chances to practice it, and then praising them when they get it right. Not praising them when they don't, but praising them when they get it right. So it's it's wee simple things. I can do that in the maths classroom. It could be done in a PE class. It could be done in a primary school classroom. It could be done in the prep for a school play. There's all sorts of scenarios where you can see you can be doing this all the time to be supporting a child to become attached to adults, to form those secure attachments. Okay, so I'm going to very quickly give a little idea about it, because we've all heard it. We have to be trauma informed. You think, what does it mean? What does it mean to me in my classroom? Do I need to suddenly become a doctor or a psychologist? Well, no. Okay, just being trauma sensitive and being aware that youngsters haven't all had been able to escape from stress, say for example, stressful situations in their family lives, which has left a legacy with that youngster. Potentially a legacy in terms of their emotional development, but also a legacy in terms of their physical development as well. So when we're trauma sensitive in a class, these are very simple things that you can be thinking about. Constantly asking them, you know, do you understand that? Are you all right? Okay. Encouraging help-seeking behaviour. Okay. So they feel safe that they can do that. Now, you could have a very precocious child that you have to manage, but at the same time, making sure that their voice matters, okay? Not to withdraw. Always providing assurance, and you'll see where these overlap. The things that we've talked about, they overlap. They're consistent with each other. It's the same messaging. So providing them with assurance that they're safe in your classroom, they're safe in your presence. Okay. Again, I'm referring to the nurture principles to the side. The next one is really, really important for your care experienced youngster and about keeping the promise. If you know that child has a family circumstance that's not quite normal, that they maybe are care experienced or on the edges of care, anticipate their reaction, potentially to content in your lessons, to really sensitive topics. So, you know, if you're drawing a picture and having mommy and daddy in it and things like this, thinking about what that might look like in the context of a care experienced child, and also anticipating transitions. So you think you've got a lovely group activity, but you've got a child who actually is really uncomfortable working with others. They have never really learned how to do that. So anticipating that and maybe putting the scaffolding in that. So I'm not saying don't do it, but put the scaffolding in to support them to do it. So it's essentially what you would do in terms of meeting needs, but being very aware that care experienced youngsters might need a little bit more, particularly around the sensitivity to content and topics of what you're teaching. Okay. Be ready to adjust your lesson if you need to suddenly, particularly for, it could be for one child, but it could be for the whole class. If you need to focus on well-being or need to focus on feelings for a while because something's happened, okay? So don't just blather on with the lesson, but be ready to adjust and accept. So the next thing is, we talked about many of our youngsters come up to us and they're not developed mentally in the place that we think they should be for the age that they are. We need to accept that they're not emotionally in that place, and potentially if they've missed a lot of school, they've had a lot of interrupted learning, they're not academically in the same place either. And I know I've been a bit not frustrated, but I actually just didn't know how to do it when I first got my child in secondary school, who had no computational skills in maths, did not know how to count on in more than ones, did not know how to multiply, and I thought, I don't know how to teach that. So, and having to go and learn how to teach a child to count, essentially, and use the computational skills that I would have expected any child coming into secondary school should know. And that's a challenge. That's a real challenge for you. And because I know I found it challenging too. So that's where it comes down to being patient and having perseverance. And you know, if for the length of the time that the child's at school, you might be working on social skills, you might be working on developing trust and building a relationship with the child, it won't necessarily happen overnight. So the basis of being trauma sensitive are being kind, being empathetic, being compassionate, but not being permissive. Okay. So just, you can create, I talked at the beginning about how you would present yourself to the child, how your classroom is presented, what you teach, and what your learners feel when they're in your classroom. But this is about those trauma sensitive spaces. And you might have limited capacity to do some of this. So if you've got a very small classroom and basically you've got a child in every seat and not got much space for them, you might not be able to create an area that has low noise. You might not be able to create an area where maybe dim lighting, okay, and dealing with those sensory issues that potentially a child might need to be met before they're ready to learn. Most of you can decorate our classrooms in the way that we like, so making sure that it's warm decorations, not too busy, but welcoming and inviting. If we can, create a cool down area or a cozy corner, that's still in the classroom. They haven't had to go anywhere, but it's not out with the classroom, but it's somewhere that if you can see that they're raging when they come into the classroom, they're not ready to learn, they need a few moments to themselves, legitimising an activity where they can go to the cozy corner. Okay, and potentially flexible seating. Now, this is where you need to use your professional judgment, because we've talked about predictability and the structures that make children feel safe. But if you know a youngster doesn't feel safe, you might want to give them a space by the door where they've got a clear exit strategy. You might want to give them a seat with their back to the wall where they don't feel that there's other youngsters looking behind them. Because how many times do you see youngsters turning in their seat all the time? And it's because they're highly anxious about who's behind them, what they're saying, what they're doing. So thinking about that, proactively thinking about that in advance. If you cannot do that, because I have taught in a classroom where I've got 33 children and 33 seats and absolutely no capacity to move them anywhere, you might have to be the person who makes that a safe space. So you might want to locate them close to yourself, or you move close to them, okay, if that helps them feel safe. So you ultimately make the biggest difference to a classroom feeling safe and trauma sensitive. Okay. Right, I'm going to go on to some stuff that's a little bit more keeping the promise that you may not be familiar with. And one of the things here is about using simple, caring language. So not overly professionalized language, it's language that youngsters can understand. Now, whether that's written in their jotters, whether that's how you speak to them, whether that's in a report that you write about them, or when you're speaking to somebody else about them. But specifically care experienced youngsters, we have traditionally used a lot of stigmatizing language around youngsters. And I'm going to show you some of the stigmatizing language that you might not have thought of, okay? So we have to consciously change that, and it's not just you in your classroom. This is as a society, we have to consciously change this, okay? The second part is trying to use supports that are non-stigmatizing. So the closer to universal, it's not different to other youngsters. If you can, the closer you can give it to universal, the less stigmatizing it is, okay? So if you can do it and use your relationship to support a child within the classroom, please do so. Whenever we're teaching, depending on what we teach in the context, it wouldn't have come up in my context in maths, except if we were just talking about informal stuff outside of school whilst the maths was happening. You'd need to be careful that we recognise that there are all sorts of different types of families, and we're sensitive around that. And finally, it's about being that good corporate parent. So I know this isn't language that we've used a lot in the past couple of years. We've moved away from this corporate parenting language, and I can tell you, care experienced youngsters don't like it. But we are there to step in when perhaps parents aren't able to do as much for their youngsters. So we want to be a good parent. So we would talk to our youngsters, maybe not as informally as we would talk to our own children, but with that caring language that we would use. Okay. So I want to show you some of the language that young people in care have told us they really don't like. And here's some of the words. And this was an exercise done with care experienced youngsters, and they just had to say to us, what is it you don't like? And you can see some of them there are unexpected. Okay, they're language that we use all the time, a non-attender. Okay, they don't have any social skills. They're under supervision. Okay, I know I've said to youngsters, are you having contact this weekend? Okay, I wouldn't say that to some of your children, because you know they're coming home to see you, mummy and daddy, or they're going to see grandma and granny at the weekend. I wouldn't say you having contact with your mum and dad. So we have to be really careful that we start to try and take this language out. And I'm going to show you a very, very short video, and I'm going to apologise. It's very Northern Irish accent, but it's one that I've used for years, and I still like it because I think it's quite hard hitting. So I'm just going to very quickly, if I can manage this, share with sound and show you this little very quick.
Like you're just like someone's job.
I was 6 whenever I first started, and I was like, what am I lacking in? Like, is there something wrong with me? Am I lacking in something? Is that why I've been removed from my mum's house?
It just makes you feel like very low because it sounds like you're lacking and stuff.
The term I would like to use would be young person, because I am a young person. That's just it.
It would make the young person feel like they can understand it better and be able to explain it better to people.
What I don't like about the word placement is it doesn't make you feel like you're at home.
Why can it just not be called a place that I am going to live, my home or my living accommodation? I don't see it why it should be somewhere that I'm placed.
Sort of makes a young person feel as if they have to grow up faster.
Like, it would make you feel less frustrated, as then you don't feel like you're just being placed somewhere and dropped off and left.
I wouldn't feel comfortable telling my mates that I'm going to contact to see my family.
In a way, it did bring a barrier between me and friends, because I wouldn't have told them I was going for contact.
I think a better word to be used other than contact would be family time.
Normal families would have family time. So we all decided that family time was more appropriate than contact, and it explained it better on what it was.
So I don't know what you thought about that, but I know that gets me every time when I see that video, because I know I've used that language in my practice in the past, and so we need to be really careful that we don't use that professionalized language and our youngsters feel cared for in the classroom. So at the moment in Scotland, because of the promise, the young people are developing a dictionary of what they don't like and what they would like us to say instead. So we're not going to be left hanging, not knowing what to say. And there's a lot of people working behind the scenes to do that. So as soon as we have that sort of dictionary as such, or a direction, a steer from the young people, we will bring it to you. So the next thing is about listening to young people. Now, last week we talked about Article 12, and it's that we need to ask young people about, you know, what and how they learn, what would make a difference, what would help them, and things like that. But today I thought I would actually just put in a little bit about how do we listen, because I often say, did you listen to what the young person said? And in actual fact, what the person was actually listening for was to reply. They weren't listening so much for the meaning and the purpose behind what the young person was saying. Because remember, sometimes young people don't know the words that they to express what they feel or what they're thinking. So you have to really sometimes really look closely behind it. So this is just a few ideas about techniques for effective listening, which you can read. It's quite easy. But I would also very much suggest to you that you need to be looking for the non-verbal cues behind what is said. So looking at facial expressions, does it articulate with what the child is saying? Head movements, their posture, is it defensive? Okay, their body and their hand movements, their leg positions. See if a child sits with their feet facing the door, they're not comfortable in the classroom. Okay, now we don't expect you to be absolute experts, but you all actually will be pretty good at reading body language. If you've been teaching for any length of time, you've had a lot of youngsters pass through your classroom, and you'll be pretty good at reading it. So be always looking for the body language, and is it backing up what the child is saying? The child could tell you, no, I'm fine. The body language is telling you, no, they're not. Okay, but also really, if I go back to the listening, really listening to what they're saying. So is a child using black and white language? Are they saying that never happens? They've always hated me. Okay, and our responsibility to then try and show them possibilities. Whereas, you know, that sometimes happens, but you remember last week you were able to fix that with that other youngster. Okay, so really listening to the language that they're using. Okay, I'm coming to the end, and so it's about keeping the promise. And these are a few things that I can sort of like quite quickly go through. But what they actually said was they want us to be ambitious for them. We know the statistics. We know that young people leave school with far lower educational outcomes. Okay, and that's not just in terms of attainment. A lot of them leave school in S4 as soon as they can, and they hit a cliff edge where they leave education and care at the same time. And that can result in a youngster ending up homeless. So, I mean, that's a dire outcome for that young person. It doesn't always end there, but a lot of them just don't achieve or attain what they could. It takes them a long time, maybe getting into a job or a university course or a college course that they want to get into. So we want to be ambitious for our youngsters. We want to build ambition in them, because sometimes they don't see the ambition in themselves, and we want to be doing that as early as possible and supporting them for that. We want to be inclusive and prioritise engagement in learning, and that's about that universal support. It's non-stigmatising, and they're more likely to engage in it. To do that, we have to understand their additional support needs, whatever they are, and adapt our teaching to match it. If we encounter a youngster which we're really struggling with, and we will, you'll always get the wee Jane or the wee Johnny in the classroom that you just don't know how to work with. Seek out professional learning that will support you with that. That is a good professional position to take. We're encouraging youngsters to be help seeking. We need to demonstrate it ourselves. So go and seek the professional, and then also re-examine your classroom practice. And particularly I'm referring to things like expectations, boundaries, and the structures within the classroom. Are they supportive of your care experienced youngsters? And if you use things like Circle, say for example, or some sort of framework to look at what could be a barrier to learning within the classroom, please use those and look at them again. But particularly things like rewards and consequences, do they support your care experienced youngsters who maybe are struggling a wee bit more to follow the rules or the expectations? And this is very much linked into how you are in terms of relationship building, nurturing and repairing yourself, but also linked into the school's relationships policy. And if that's really just a punitive behaviour management policy, be asking the senior leadership team to change it, because that's not going to work for a lot of your youngsters with additional support needs or who are care experienced. So bringing you back, if you do these 4 things in these 4 themes, you will be keeping the promise. okay? So if you need to go back and get tips about these 4 themes, look at last week's presentation. I didn't want to go over that today. I wanted to bring out the things that are particularly important for care experienced youngsters, and nurture and care are really, really important there. And one last thing I'm going to say is you can make a significant difference to the care experienced youngsters in your class. And I want to do that by demonstrating this particular clip. So this is a man called Jimmy Paul. Some of you may know him because he now works in the Scottish Government. But I shall just stop sharing this screen and share Jimmy Paul.
From when I was looked after by my own parents at home, I moved out from foster care to residential care, and that was really tough because that residential unit had no cooking facilities, it didn't have a washing machine. We had police visits every week. It felt like we were being criminalised, and it were teachers that really helped turn that around for me. Mr. Ryder cooked me hot meals after work so that I could eat good things and then go home and study. Miss Vanichka did my clothes washing. She used to take my clothes on a Monday and return them to me ironed and clean on a Tuesday. And Miss SS, or Southwell Sander, who I'm still in touch with, and I still call her Miss, she checked up on me every single day to make sure that I was doing okay, that I was healthy and well, and anything I needed to get to university would be sorted out. I'm really not sure where I would be if it wasn't for my teachers, but what I do know is they reminded me that people can be good at a time in my life when I was completely doubting that people had it in them to do good things for children. As people, when we're at our lowest, it's a real opportunity for other people to support us and remind us of the shared humanity that we all have. I think too often in the care system, we assume that we need to be professional, which means cold, mechanical, systematic, distant. But actually a key part of being professional needs to be being personal and bringing your whole self to work so that you can connect with people on a very human level. And that's what teachers did, and it really changed my life for the better. So my statement is that we need to nurture the adults and the people around children in order for children to be properly nurtured. We need all of the workforce, we need all people that are around children to have the headspace, the time and the willingness. They need to receive kind of mentoring and support from their peers in order to realise that you can be human with people. It's really important, and once you can connect with them, you can understand them and really help them with what matters.
So that I think it reminds us all that the jobs that we do with all youngsters, but particularly our care experienced youngsters who perhaps need that kindness, compassion, empathy a little bit more, but what a difference it makes to their lives when we get it right. And Jimmy Paul reminds us that we need to look out for ourselves. Oh, that was just going a bit too far. We need to look out for ourselves to be able to support the children and young people in our care. Education is part of the scaffolding of care, and that's really what keeping the promise means. So that is the end of my presentation, and I know Kat is going to give us some her experience of what she's been doing in her assessing to keep the promise.
If I can get off mute. Janine, thank you so much. That was really really informative, and I love that. Lots of great tips. I have just put the note in for the evaluation in case the numbers dwindle the minute I start talking. So the link to the evaluation is there. I'm going to try to go super quickly. I have probably repeated some of the things that Janine has said,
Oh, that's the whole screen that I'm sharing rather than the actual document. Hold on. I'm going to try to not repeat, so I will skip over where I possibly can to try and save your ears. Okay. Okay, so I mean, at the moment, I'm no longer being Cat Calvert Workstream Lead Officer in the West Partnership. I'm going back to my own position because this is a seconded post where I was head teacher at Glenboig Primary for 7 years. And yep, the old @Cat 300 is my head teacher account and kind of more about me. So my why, I've been in teaching for probably about 20 years, I think 19 years. And when I had my son 11 years ago at the Royal Infirmary, I met a lady who, in the breakfast room, and those of you who have had children will know what that's like, and you're having a chat, what did you have? You had a wee boy, a wee girl. This lady had a wee boy, and however, he wasn't born in the same day as my son, and they don't like to keep you in for very long. So I said, yeah, she'd been in for about a week, and was she okay? And it turned out that social work were trying to find a home for her and her son. And it made me think, here are two wee boys born within a week of each other with the same healthcare in exactly the same postcodes, and what different lives they have, and it is neither of their own doing. And I often think about that wee boy. I went to a care experience thing as I started as a head teacher, and that really brought to me, it was when PEF was coming out, and when they brought out PEF and we looked at it, and there wasn't really an option for supporting care experience young people, but yet so many of them were born in adversity and deprivation, but yet it didn't quite account for them, and it was part of that unfairty movement. And there was a young boy who had grown up in residential, who had studied very hard and got to university and went to Harvard. However, he simplified it all by saying there was nobody to put his graduation photo on the mantelpiece. And that kind of brought that home to me. And then as I continue to work with care experienced young people, my learners are my why. So our starting point was, I started in Glenboig Primary and we had our first induction of Primary 1, and to say it was a disaster is an understatement. I felt like I should have moved my office to the Primary 1 classroom, and I was probably spending at least 50% of my time in the Primary 1 toilets. And instead of saying they weren't school ready, we said we weren't ready for them, and we hadn't taken fully account of needs and the makeup of the class and what could we do differently. And I approached North Lanarkshire to find out about this Solihull training that was going on in early years, because I felt we had to be more, because we didn't have a nursery, and how could we be more early years knowledgeable? And we trained our whole staff. Now, we were the first primary school in North Lanarkshire to do that because it was only on offer to early years at that point. And it really changed how we did things. Now, I know the Solihull offer isn't available in every local authority. There are lots of nurture type trainings out there, and we continued with our training. And I've put in a link to the national training offers that are there. That's a web page on Education Scotland that has lots and lots of information on where you can source different training. It's all about relationships. I cannot stress that, and you will know that. I'm hoping that I'm preaching to the converted. However, if I'm not, I cannot advise you. I can't give you any better advice than to build relationships. We had 13% care experienced in our school. We had a lot of relationships to build. We had a mix. We had children who were looked after at home with social work input. We had it right from the range to children who were in residential houses with nowhere to go. We had the full range in between as well. What I would say is begin with a child, get to know them, spend time with them, find out what they like. The more time you spend with them, the more trust that you will build with them, because that's really what it's all about. They're looking at you thinking, what is she going to be like, or what is he going to be like? Are they going to moan at me? Are they going to make my life difficult? Do I even want to be here? And then start to build it out to the people around them, whether it's their family, it might be brothers or sisters in the school, it might be their family, it might be the social workers who are involved with them, because they will also be part of their family. If they've been in and around their home for a long time, they will have an attachment to that social worker, whether it be positive or negative. They will have a relationship with them. So find out everything you can from them and any healthcare professionals who work with them too. The other thing I would say is show everyone respect. Now, as a head teacher, I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time probably with my children's families, and there were many situations where people would say, she's a disgrace of a mother. That's a terrible, that woman doesn't deserve those kids. And I understand why people feel like that, but you also have to remember that she's the best mother they've got. They don't have another mother. They will love her. And the minute you show any level of disrespect to the parent, whether you approve of them or not, that will cause a breakdown in your relationship with that child. So it's about building the best relationship that you can with everyone around them. The best resources, there is no best resource, there's no book. If only there was a textbook that told us how to do this, then we'd all have read it in whatever further education establishment we went to, and we'd all be perfect at it. What can I say? A well-trained staff. Give them every opportunity that you can. If you're the head teacher, if you're a class teacher, seek out every opportunity you can with training. Now, that goes down to nurture principles, being trauma-informed, a strong knowledge of the curriculum. If you know your curriculum inside out, then you will find ways to support that child. Your support staff, do not invest in your support staff. We've had one school send their whole support staff to our trauma-informed, our Keeping Trauma in Mind sessions that the West Partnership ran through this work stream. And the more informed your support staff are, the better relationships that they will build and the better way that they will support those children. Your catering staff, your janitors, your clerical should all be trained in nurture principles so that they understand, because it just takes one tiny comment from somebody who doesn't understand why the child's behaving in the way that they're behaving, and you can lose a day, a week, you can go back so many steps. So ultimately, the best resource is you, the people that are around that child. And that's what we found. And once we had that well-trained staff, it created the ethos that we wanted in the school. So moving on to ethos and culture, so important. Want them in the school. I had a family who came to me as all the old term school refusers, and we turned them into 96% attenders. And that was, we want you in here. I want you in here. You're coming in to enrol. I'll give you a uniform. You'll have the full badged uniform. You won't look any different from anyone else. You're not coming in the Tesco jumper that doesn't have the badge on it. Here you go. Here's the official one. Be welcoming to them. You'll know all of this. The child that's coming in late every day, doesn't matter. Don't berate them. Be glad that they're in. Note it, monitor it through management and the right way to do it, but don't monitor it through the child, because they should never feel that they're not welcome. Again, that non-judgmental, not, oh, were you playing the Xbox again? You know, where have you been? Nothing like that. Great to see you. Come on in, let's find your seat. Let's get you started. Find someone that can help them, whether it's you or someone else, whatever's going to make less of a fuss to help them. Again, it's that transition, isn't it? Back into that classroom. And if they've made that difficult transition where they're walking in late, that's a really, really hard thing to do. Imagine yourself when you're walking into a conference and you've come in through a traffic jam or the rain, and you're the one walking in and the speaker's already started, and you don't know where you're going to sit, and is somebody going to find a space for you? Are you going to stand awkwardly at the back? It's awful as an adult. Imagine that as someone who's possibly going through all sorts of trauma just to get in or to get out the house and into your building. Being collaborative, working with the team around the child, doing it for the most positive outcomes possible, and then making links with the community. So one of the things that we found was there was a family who moved into our area and they came with such stigma, and the community were quite awful about them, and the parents were already talking about them before they'd even stepped foot in the school. So what we had to do was find ways to support those children in the community, to help them to attend youth clubs. We were very lucky. We had a social enterprise in the village, and I had a really good relationship with them. We'd built that up, and we would just, all I needed to say was, we had a wee code, they're needing a bit of help, and that was enough. And then the social enterprise would make it their business to make sure that they were accepted in the youth club or attending the craft groups, or you know, after school care. If the parents couldn't afford it, obviously we would find ways for them to go into that, because it was a way to integrate with other children. Anything that you can to help that ethos and culture of acceptance and the importance of school and the importance of turning up and the importance of wanting to be here. Be mindful of them all the time. We're all about data at the moment. So always think about your care experience children. And this came to me probably a wee bit later on in the journey, when actually I looked at this club that we'd started. And we'd started a girls' basketball club. And there's my stats there. 45% high deprivation, 45% of them lived in mid. 35% of them had additional support needs. 20% of them were care experienced. And only when I started to pull the stats out and I thought, there's quite a few in there that are care experienced. What's the percentage? 20%. Our retention rate in that club was 95%. And the way that grew in the school was huge, and we became a whole basketball community because we looked for links, we looked for opportunities. We made links with a partner club in the community who came in and did work with the children. We had professional coaches. They became this thing, this force. It was a thing that people aspired to be in. Girls wanted to be in it. The boys wrote to me and demanded a club and said that I was being sexist and discriminating against them. And then we then took it further. We looked for further opportunities, and staff were trained. I was trained. Contacted Basketball Scotland because they wanted to play in a league, but there wasn't such a thing. And we joined the proper clubs league, and those girls ended up second top in the league, having gone as like something out of the Mighty Ducks at the beginning, and they were going through to nationals. However, the COVID got us and we didn't make it, but they did so well. But it's this wee quote here. It was fun to play in, and you got to make new friendships. And there was another one where they said that they got to speak to people that they didn't normally speak to, and that was just an opportunity for these girls to be accepted and to have conditions put on them, expectations. But it was done in a way that they were all in the same playing field. They didn't have to write a story. They didn't have to stand up and get a maths question right. They were all learning together. I'm going to check my time. Be creative. Think about different ways. Think about parts of their development that they've missed out on. We had a wee boy in primary 4, he'd never heard a nursery rhyme. He'd missed out on that whole experience. So he loved that. We were finding out about a bit of that when we were doing times when he just couldn't cope in the classroom. Another young lady who's now a Promise champion in Renfrewshire told me that she didn't know how to put petrol in the tank because she'd lived in a children's house and been picked up by a minibus every day. So there's life skills as well in secondary that think about things that they're going to have to do that they won't have done. Think about the structure in your classroom. Janine's touched on that, so I won't go into that. And creative with your curriculum. This is where you're the best resource because it's working hard for their engagement, making them want to learn, making them want to be a part of that environment. You have them hanging in your every word. They might not be able to write it up, but they'll be able to listen if you work hard for them and you provide the right conditions for them to do that in and make them feel safe enough. Think about specialists in the community. Another thing was one of the children from that family I told you about who weren't being accepted in the community because it was just a name that had been created for them. She went to an art club that community members were going to, older people in the community that they were going to an art club with an art teacher, and we sent her to it. We paid for her to go to it during the school day. She loved art. She engaged with people in the community and they changed their opinion of her. They spoke about her differently. And all of a sudden, it was just building respect for her because she deserved the respect. She was a lovely, lovely girl, but she was being judged wrongly. And then the other thing is opportunities for small group working. Remember that being in that large classroom is going to be hard for them. Feeling judged all the time, that ability to open up will be really difficult. So we did things where we had, and again, this was all about the training of staff. We had a girls club that focused on friendship and self and body image. Chat and chill for boys was a wee opportunity for them to get together, talk about their feelings. Lego therapy, traditionally used to support autism, but a great tool for supporting communication skills and turn taking. Build to Express is another one with Lego where they have a Lego kit and they're given emotions and they build it and then they create their story out of that. So it's not requiring them to draw, they think they're playing with Lego and then they can talk about how they're feeling. Board games clubs, either for children or including families because they may not have a board game in the house. Fairy tales, linking into that boy that hadn't done his nursery rhymes. We did fairy tales in upper primary where they told the stories from a different viewpoint, which meant we were doing a bit of learning about that, but encouraging them to engage in it from a more mature aspect. And then social stories, again, traditionally used with children as a tool with children with autism, but a really good way for reflection, especially when things go wrong, for helping them to understand that actually the key point, the key breakdown was over here, when actually they think it was here when they got the row. And then looking at them, support them to reflect on how they did things differently. I'm going to glaze over this bit. Don't overpromise. Think about what you can actually do. Be careful about attachment. Another thing we had was, as head teacher, 2 children in a family got overly attached to me, started to treat me as mum, and we saw the behaviours that were happening at home, and we had to, you know, restructure the support that was there for those children, because it was that fighting for my attention. We said, right, okay, we have to change this up, this can't work. So think about who your key people are for people. Children will always want a key person. Just think about that over dependence on that key person. We had to really focus on that. Every day is a learning day for you. Think about this, the consistent message of expectations. One of them it was, remember, we don't swear in here. Remember, we don't swear. And again, it's that whole thing of, I know it's acceptable at home, but we don't do that in here. Helping them to articulate fears and worries. Again, that social stories or those that Build to Express was a great tool for that, because you know that it's there. Somebody said, one boy said to me, I don't like my social worker being in the school because everyone's going to know it's my social worker. I said, but you're not the only one with a social worker and nobody knows she's yours, but we'll get her to take her badge off. And he was fine, because then I said, you can just say it's your auntie, it's fine. And this one, show up for them, especially when they can't show up for themselves, because there's days where they just can't hold it together. So you be there for them. And then this next one, when it all gets too much, and that's for you and for them. So have a way to take a break that's safe. I'm not, nobody's walking out of a classroom, but think of a way. We do it for children. We give them breaks from the classroom. Sometimes the teacher needs a break from that child. Think of a way to do that that's not a rejection for the child, and it doesn't create failure for the teacher. Remember your why. Remember why you're doing this. If it's too much for you, speak to a colleague. Sometimes articulating it for you as well is really, really important, because it's a lot to take on. Have something with a mantra on it. This was actually, it was our school chaplain that said this to me. I was talking to him and there was a day just been really difficult. And I said, hard day today. And he just said to me, just remember, hurt people hurt people. And that was always my thing when I remembered it. I was like, that's why they're doing this. They've been hurt. I'm not hurt. Don't take it personally. It's not against me. I'm just the person that they feel safe enough to hurt and to express how they're feeling. Remember that you're the person that fights for them. You might be the only one that's fighting for them that day. You might be the only one that's fighting for them in their whole life, and they will know that. They'll just find it hard to accept it all of the time. And then my other why was always, if it was your child, what would you want for them? And that was always my guiding principle. Would I want this for my child? And if the answer was no, then it doesn't happen. I'm going to stop there because I'm really worried that I'm going over. I've put 2 links in here as well. Every Kid Needs a Champion, old one, but a good one. Always good for a listen to. And actually, if you search Rita Pearson, she has loads of videos on YouTube that were brilliant. That woman was just amazing. And then this other one up here is Laura Beveridge, who's a young person from Glasgow who was in care. And it's an excellent TED Talk. It's a 10-minute listen. Great just for a wee break and make you think about supporting young people and how they feel. So that is me. Numbers haven't dwindled too much, so that wasn't too bad. I hope that I haven't confused any issues, Janine, or but that was our experience in Glenboig, and I've got to say it was probably one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had as well, supporting them. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I'm going to say thank you very much again to Janine, and thank you to all of you for coming along tonight.